Hello and welcome to our first grammar lesson. I'm sure you're worried about how to learn grammar, but fear not, it's going to be very simple. Today we'll be looking at inversion. Now, look at this picture. But I'm going to start with something really nice by showing you a picture of a castle at Disneyland. What do you think of this place? Let me tell you, for me, I have never seen such a beautiful place. It's so pretty for me. Now, any regular sentence in grammar starts with a subject, verb, object. I have never seen such a beautiful place, but it's a regular sentence. Now, if I want to emphasize, I'm going to say, never have I seen such a beautiful place. This is inversion. It's basically just rearranging and reorganizing the words to make it sound more dramatic and give it more emphasis. Now, in order to understand inversion, you have to follow a few steps. First of all, to understand why and when we use it. If you're trying to show some dramatic effect, to tell a story that's really exciting, if you want to emphasize a point, or you're talking to someone you're not a friend, it's not very friendly, or you're talking to a superior, your boss, or a teacher, and you're trying to seem formal, you're going to use inversion. So it's used for formality, for emphasis, and for dramatic effect. Now that we've established when and why we use it, let's see the steps that will help you invert sentences. Very easy. Like we said, a regular sentence usually starts with a subject, verb, object. But in inversion, it's different. We start with the adverb. And adverbs are things like rarely, no sooner, hardly, little. These are all examples of adverbs. We then add the auxiliary verb, like do, did, does, or had, has, have. Then we add our what? What do you think? What do we add? We add our subject and the main verb. These are the three steps, or the order of the words in an inverted sentence. So what do you have to do? What do you think? All you have to do to invert sentences is to follow the equation. And I've added the equation for you on the board. It's adverb plus auxiliary plus subject plus main verb plus object. Very simple. Let's see how we applied that equation to the first sentence that we took. I have never seen such a beautiful place. This is our regular sentence. Let's give it a little bit of emphasis. Where's our adverb? It's never. Exactly, it's never. So we're going to start with it. Never, and then we're going to add our auxiliary. Where is it? Or our modal. Have. Never, have. And then what do we add? We add the subject. Never have I. Then we add our main verb, seen such a beautiful place. What do you think about this sentence? Do you think it's more dramatic? Yes, I agree with you. It's more dramatic and it gives more emphasis. Now, what do you do when there is no auxiliary verb? This is a very important question. If there's no auxiliary verb in the sentence, the equation has an auxiliary verb. So what do? Let me tell you what you do. You simply add one. You add either do, did, or does. And how do you choose it? You choose it based on the verb in the sentence. So let's give you an example. I rarely go out. Is there a helping or auxiliary verb in this sentence? I rarely go out. No, there is not. So you're going to add do, did, or does. Let's see how we choose it. I is singular, the subject is singular, and go is in the present tense. So we're going with either what? Do or does. So what does I take? What do you think? Does it take do or does? Yes, you're correct. It takes do. Rarely do I go out. And this is how you form it if there is no auxiliary verb. Let's take another example. Now, this is John. John rarely has a good story to narrate. Now you're thinking, John rarely has a good story to narrate. It's a very normal sentence. We're not emphasizing that he doesn't have any good stories. Let's invert it. What do we start with? We start with our adverb. Excellent. Rarely, what? Now John is singular, but we're using his name. So do we add do or does? What do you think? Rarely does John have a good story to narrate. And why did we choose have and not has? Why do you think? Yes, you're correct. We use have because we're talking about John and we're not using I, the singular I. Now, rarely does John have a good story to narrate. What's narrate? Narrate is when you have a story and you're giving a spoken or written account of something. You know, when you watch a movie and there's a narrator telling you the story in a spoken account, this is narrate. Narrate is the verb and the narrator is the noun, the person who tells the story. For example, my mother always narrates a story before I go to bed. Now that we know this word, let's move on to another example to make sure that you really got inversion. I little expected to bump into my classmate when I was in Dubai. I little expected. Where is our main verb? Don't get scared. If you get stuck, try to look for the verb first or the subject, whichever makes you happier or more comfortable. I, obviously, is the subject. Little expected. So expected here is the verb. So is there a helping verb or an auxiliary verb in the sentence? No. So we're going to simply fill in the equation. Little did I expect to bump into my classmate when I was in Dubai. Now, notice, because we used did and it's in the past tense, what do we do with the verb, which was in the past tense, expected? We change it. We don't keep it in the past tense because we replaced it with did. Little did. Did is in the past, so we don't need to repeat it again in the main verb expected. Little did I expect to bump into my classmate. Now, what do I mean when I say bump into? When you bump into someone, you meet them by chance. You're going out and you meet someone you haven't met in a long time by chance. Did you plan for it? No, you just met them. For example, Amira was very happy when she bumped into her friend, her old neighbor. She was happy she met her by chance. She didn't plan for it. And now, another example. As soon as I had plucked up the courage to speak to him, he left to another shop. Let's invert it to give it more of a dramatic effect. Now, if you use as soon as, the alternative that you're going to use with it is no sooner. So, no sooner had I plucked up the courage to speak to him, then he left to another shop. No sooner is always paired with what? With than. No sooner than. So we're just going to replace it. As soon as I, if you see as soon as, when you want to invert it, you're going to go with no sooner. No sooner, then you're going to add what? Had, which is the auxiliary verb, then the subject. No sooner had I, and then the main verb, plucked up the courage. Pluck up the courage. What do I mean when I say pluck up the courage? When you pluck up the courage, you make an effort to face your fear, something that scares you, and you face it. For example, the penguin here in the picture, do you think he's willing to jump? No, maybe he's scared, but he does it anyway. And that's when you pluck up the courage to face something that you fear or you're really not looking forward to. Let me give you an example to make sure you understand the word. We have to pluck up the courage when we're in danger in order to deal with the situation. You have the sentence here for you on the screen, so try to use it in your own way. Try to think of a situation where you plucked up the courage and use that word. Now, what do we have to do? We have to move on to another example. Now, do you know Fahd Dehani? I'm sure you all know about him. Dehani valued his fan and really enjoyed meeting them. Now, this is a regular sentence. If I want to show that he really, really values his fans, I'm going to use inversion. So I'm going to use not only. Not only, but. Not only is always paired with what? But. Not only did he value his fans, but he really enjoyed meeting them. Let's break down the sentence together. Dehani valued his fans. Dehani is the subject, valued is the verb, and the object is his fans. Now we're going to use not only, which is the adverb, not only did, because there is no helping or auxiliary verb in the sentence. Not only did Dehani value. Notice that we removed the past tense or the past tense of the verb, the main verb in the sentence. Not only did Dehani value his fans, but he really enjoyed meeting them. And now, another example here. Sami had scarcely left when he ran into his friend. Look at the word ran into before we look at the sentence. What is it similar to? We've taken a similar word here. Ran into is similar to bump into. Sami had scarcely left when he ran into his friend. And here, scarcely is our adverb, so we're going to start with it. Scarcely had Sami left when he ran into his old friend or his friend. Very simple, just simply follow the equation, and remember, if there is no auxiliary verb, simply add one there using do, did, or does. Now, we have more examples for you. What I suggest is that you read each example with me and then pause the video, try to answer it, and then check your answers with me. I have never been so astounded. Let's make it more dramatic. What do we start with? What do you think? I have never been. Very easy. I'm going to start with our adverb, never. And then what am I going to add? Our auxiliary, exactly, which is what? Let's have. Never have I, the subject, been so astounded. Now, don't be scared. Try to think and break down the sentence. For example, here the verb is been. So it can be been, it can be have, it can be has. Don't be scared. Look at the sentence and try to find. If you don't know where the verb is, try to look for the subject. After you find the subject, look, is there a helping or auxiliary verb? And then look for the verb. Take it one step at a time. Let's look at the second example. Sarah seldom leaves the class without permission. Now we're going to start obviously with what? With our adverb. Do you see it in the sentence? Yes, it's seldom. Seldom. However, is there an auxiliary verb in the sentence? Sarah seldom leaves. What do you think? No, exactly. So we're going to replace it with what? Do, did, or does. Leaves is in which tense? Exactly. So what are we going to use? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to give you a chance to guess. Sarah seldom leaves. Exactly. You've chosen the correct answer. Seldom does Sarah leave the class without permission. And notice, because we used does, what did we remove from the verb? We removed the S. This is very important. Make sure if you add do, did, or does, that you change the tense of the verb accordingly, because we don't want you to miss out on any marks. Let's look at the next example. My brother rarely gets up early on Saturdays. How do we arrange the sentence, or how do we invert it? We invert it by using the equation that you all by now must have memorized. So rarely, what? We're going to add what? An auxiliary because it's not there. Rarely does my brother get up early on Saturdays. What did we remove? The S. Very, very simple. And here we have one more sentence. Ali had no sooner entered the stage than the crowd cheered. Now, what do we add if we see no sooner? What should it always be paired with? No sooner is always paired with than. Remember this. This is very, very important. So how are we going to arrange it? No sooner, what? There is a helping verb here. Exactly. So no sooner had Ali entered the stage than the crowd cheered. Very simple. An equation, you fill it in, and if there are any missing details, you add them yourself. Now that we've completed inversion, we're going to move to comparative and contrastive connectors. Now, from the name, connectors, obviously it means that you're trying to connect two things. Why? To compare and contrast. Very simple. It's in the name. What are examples of comparative connectors? Before I give you the examples, let me tell you why we use them. We use them if we're trying to compare two things that have significant differences from each other. What do I mean by significant? I mean very obvious differences. So if you have two things, you're trying to compare them to show how they're compare and contrast them, either show how they're different, then you're going to use these comparative and contrastive connectors. Yes. For example, if I'm going to compare the two boys in the picture, I'm going to say one is short, whereas the other is tall. Very simple. Now, some examples of comparative and contrastive connectors are here on the screen for you. Well, we're going to take one by one. Let's start with whereas and but. When we use whereas and but, obviously, usually we give one thing, and then we're going to show how it's different. For example, life in the village is peaceful, so I'm showing it's peaceful. Whereas I'm going to give something completely different. This is why we're trying to show the differences. Life in the village is peaceful, whereas life in the city is stressful. Very simple, very easy. You can use whereas in the middle of the sentence and in the beginning of the sentence, as you can see in the second example. However, but can only be used in the middle of the sentence. On the other hand, is used when we're trying to give one information and then we're going to give something completely different. For example, traveling by car is very cheap. On the other hand, now I'm going to talk about something completely different. On the other hand, flying is more expensive. Another one we have here is instead of, when you give an alternative or you give something else. Now, when you use instead of, remember, you have to follow it with what? You have to follow it with a verb in the gerund form. So instead of eating, you should diet. Instead of watching TV, read a book. So the examples we have here are, instead of cultivating the land, some villagers moved to the city. And as you can see in the sentence here, instead of is always followed by a verb with the ing. Instead of coffee, I prefer tea. Now you can also use it by adding a noun after it. So if you use instead of, you can follow it with a noun. Instead of coffee, I prefer tea. But if you choose to follow it with a verb, the verb has to be in the ing form. Instead of cultivating, see how the verb has an ing? But when we decided to use the noun, we simply added the noun instead of coffee. You also hear, you can use it in the middle of the sentence. I read books instead of what? Watching movies. Excellent. And now, in comparison with, it's very clear from the name, you're going to compare one thing to another. So we can use it to say, in comparison with urban areas, rural areas are more peaceful and quieter. Very simple. However, it's very easy to use because we use it to show that something is different. Chinese grammar is not too difficult. Some saying it's a little bit easy. However, now you're going to pose a problem. Usually when we use however, we want to show that there's a difference or it's difficult for you. However, the pronunciation will be very hard for me. And now it's time for functions. I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but I'm going to give you some very important tips. When it comes to answering language functions, you must consider the following. First, write down what you would say. You yourself. Think of it. Put yourself in that situation and think, if someone told you that, how would you respond and what are the things that you're going to say? And finally, write a full, accurate sentence. That's all we need from you. I'm going to give you an example here. Some people think that living in the city will be easier and more comfortable. So someone is telling you this opinion. You're going to answer by stating what you think. You can either give reasons, state advantages or disadvantages, compare or contrast. It's up to you. So put yourself in that situation and answer. Here's another example. Try to attempt it yourself. In this episode, we covered a number of things. We covered inversion, comparative and contrastive connectors. We also covered how to use functions correctly and gave you some tips on that. I hope this episode was useful. Thank you for watching.